Well, news wars took yet another nasty turn this week after Glenn Beck took on the Obama administration and won. The Fox News host launched a crusade against a little-known White House environmental advisor named Van Jones. That initially prompting Jones to apologize for calling Republicans a rather crude term ending in holes.
How about the being a member of the radical group Storm? Communist? No. How about being a black nationalist in his past? No apology for that. How about taking wealth from one group and another and doing it the entire system over? No. No apology for that.
Now, most of the mainstream media ignored the controversy, but then Beck reported that Jones had signed a 2004 petition urging an investigation of those wild and ridiculous charges that Bush administration officials deliberately allowed thousands of Americans to be killed in the 9/11 attacks. The Obama aide quietly resigned last weekend.
I am not the one to congratulate. I can go on and on and on about this stuff every night, but if you don't care and it doesn't connect with the American people, what I say doesn't matter. But you know what? It wasn't until this weekend that the mainstream media started saying it, and they got the story wrong 6 ways to Sunday.
Now, that triggered an unusual response from MSNBC's Keith Olbermann, who wrote on the liberal website Daily Kos that people should send me everything you can find on Beck, his producer, or Fox News chairman Roger Ailes. This echoing Beck's own request on Twitter for everything his fans could find on 3 administration officials. Olbermann later dropped the appeal, saying he doesn't want to operate the way Beck does.
I have some things Mr. Beck does not: a conscience, respect of my colleagues, and self-respect. Besides which, in just the last 10 weeks, Beck has fantasized about poisoning the Speaker of the House of Representatives. He's agreed with a guest who advocated a bin Laden terror attack on this country, and he's already personally called the President of the United States a racist.
So did Beck go overboard? What about Olbermann's reaction? And where was the rest of the media on the Van Jones controversy? Joining us now to talk about that, Chris Starwalt, political editor of the Washington Examiner, and Anna Marie Cox, national correspondent for Air America Radio and a columnist for Playboy magazine. Anna Marie, Glenn Beck targeted Van Jones, kicked the hell out of him on the air, but some of his information was damaging and Jones resigned.
Yes, I think this is another sign. I am very curious about how the White House sort of thought through some of these lower level appointees, and not so lower level. I think that while during the campaign they showed a really masterful understanding of the way that the media works and the way that people respond to certain kinds of allegations, it seems like they really had no idea this was going to be a problem. And that disturbs me more than anything.
I heard of Google.
Yeah.
Chris Starwalt, Van Jones co-founded a group called Color of Change, which has mounted a boycott campaign against Glenn Beck's Fox show. Now, Beck started attacking Jones before that boycott. I should have made that clear last time I talked about it on this program. But then he really intensified it after the boycott, and he never told his viewers about the boycott. Was that a misstep?
On Beck's part, obviously not. He won. He carried the day. Van Jones is out. It's a win for his team. I think the bigger question that the Van Jones controversy creates is who is the White House talking to and who are they listening to? It sounds like they're listening to Glenn Beck, and if that's going on, he's going to continue to have trouble with the left.
The New York Times didn't run a story on this Van Jones controversy until after he'd already resigned. Why did the mainstream media, with few exceptions, all but ignore these allegations until the very end?
Well, I want to be clear. I think that there's actually not a lot to these allegations.
The guy signed a truther petition
that he was deceived about.
Well, how do you know that?
Because maybe the mainstream media may not have been following this, but it was plenty of information on blogs
his
and everywhere.
signature is on the petition. So
right.
we're supposed to now accept his after.
And actually, so do you think that the 9/11 truthers are the people whose word we should be taking on this about how they got signatures on this petition?
There's a document with his signature on it.
There is a document with his signature on it, and I'm not sure if I completely buy the way that signature got there.
Whether Van Jones was in the right or not,
right.
When he's saying things like white environmentalists are forcing pollution into communities of color, I mean, isn't that a story? He's a White House official.
Yes, it is a story. I think there's actually, maybe there's a whole history to that kind of criticism of the way that environment sort of charges work. Poor communities do get a disproportionate amount of.
My point is, maybe it's fine to run a story saying Van Jones is getting a bum rap. Here are the allegations.
Right.
They're not really true. but to run some story.
Yeah, no, I definitely, sure.
That would have been the absolute story that at the very least, the New York Times didn't do any stories, Post didn't do any stories.
The Washington Post did one story the day before the resignation.
The day before the resignation.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I meant to say during the run-up. But
yeah.
the point being, when you hear the managing editor for the New York Times or read the managing editor for the New York Times saying that we were short-staffed because of the holiday weekend.
That was pretty lame.
And we weren't able, therefore, to cover the green job czar situation.
Jill Abramson also acknowledged that the Times had been slow on the story. What about Olbermann's role? Here he is going out and saying, give me everything you can find on Beck. I mean, even though he later pulled back, it made me think, one journalist investigating another, do we really want to go there?
Well, Glenn Beck's talking about the President of the United States and his administration. Keith Olbermann's talking about Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck has twice the viewership. He beats him in the demographics that advertisers want. He just kicks him all over the place. The fact that Olbermann is trying to sort of latch on to some part of Beck's surprising success, I think is indicative of what the situation is for him.
But Olbermann also says that Fox targets him by printing false rumors in the New York Post, also owned by Rupert Murdoch, and he's got several examples. So.
I think there's something to that. I think that there's something to the fact that people in media are obsessed with themselves and with each other. That doesn't make it okay for Olbermann to call for an investigation squad from the Baker Street irregulars, I think he called them. Although it's funny, I watched A Face in the Crowd last night, which is a big reference point for Keith Olbermann when it comes to Glenn Beck, the character Lonesome Rhodes, who's this sort of rabble-rousing right-wing demagogue. And that actually, I just wish he had stuck with pointing people to that movie rather than pointing people to investigate.
Well, let's concede the point about self-obsession, which probably most people out there would
yes.
not dispute. Are these feuds that go on, particularly between Fox and MSNBC, but there are plenty of others, are they a form of holding journalists accountable, or is it just ideological warfare?
Feuds are not holding people accountable. Feuds are petty and about just digging up dirt. Holding people accountable
and
is
maybe getting ratings.
And maybe getting ratings. And holding people accountable is what Chris was talking about, which is that when these allegations about Van Jones started getting thrown around, someone should have done a story. Are they true? Is there anything here? And in the context of a larger question of the administration, how important is this job? Do these past views have any sort of influence on what he's doing now? Feuds are just feuds are what kids do in playgrounds, and they throw mud pies.
Glenn Beck, of course, also called the President of the United States a racist, said he had a deep-seated hatred for white culture. That's what triggered the boycott, whether Van Jones personally was involved in it or not. But he also talks about being a recovering alcoholic, how he's made a lot of mistakes, and does he successfully use that to kind of deflect criticism of some of his more inflammatory rhetoric, of which there is no shortage, I should add?
Well, there is that. But there also, I think the real reason for Beck's success is that there are more conservatives than liberals in America, and he's giving conservatives a way to plug